Today we're talking about the Watchers. These are heavenly beings that are mentioned in the ancient Book of Enoch. They were sent to help guide humanity, but instead cause its downfall. They were angels with wisdom and power, chosen because they were disciplined and devoted to God. In the Book of Enoch, it is described how the worst result of the Watchers' rebellion was the creation of the Nephilim. The Nephilim were mixed beings, being born from forbidden relationships between angels and humans. The Watchers were meant to be guardians, an invisible barrier between the heavenly world and the human world. But what happens when those who are supposed to guide humanity starts to question their own duty? What if their interest turns into something forbidden, something dark, perhaps evil? So we're going to go through all the details, everything you need to know about the Watchers. So let's dive in. What's up, people, and welcome back to Religion Camp. My name is Mark Gagnon, and thank you for joining me in my tent, where every single week, every Sunday, we explore the most interesting, controversial, and strange stories from every religion from around the world, from all time. And of course, I'm joined by my fearless producer and dear friend, Gabe Reyes. What's up? All right, dude, come on. It's just constantly talking, this guy. You know, he's just yapping nonstop. We don't have time, Gabe, because today we're talking about the Watchers, the Anunnaki. This is just an all-time classic religious tale. If you know anything about this story, I mean, it is truly one of my most favorite and most fascinating topics to discuss when it comes to arcane texts from around the time of the early church and of Christ, and basically any type of biblical history. This is a story from the books of Enoch, specifically First Enoch. And it is fascinating. It has transgressed time. It has a foothold in many different facets of sci-fi, religious history, film, TV. The Anunnaki, the idea of Prometheus, the bringer of light that actually causes humanity's downfall. We're going to go through all the details, everything you need to know about the Watchers. So let's dive in. Okay, these are heavenly beings that are mentioned in the ancient Book of Enoch. They were sent to help guide humanity, but instead cause its downfall. They share a forbidden knowledge that changes history of, the human race, and this knowledge brings both progress and destruction to the world. And the reason why this is not included in the Bible, well, we'll discuss, okay? So, according to the Book of Enoch, this was an ancient Jewish text from around 300 BC. The Watchers were not ordinary angels, okay? They were a special group chosen by God for a unique mission, all right, to watch over humanity in its early days. Their job is important, but particular, okay? They have to observe, guide, and protect the human race as it took its first steps into the world. At this time, again, according to the Book of Enoch, people had barely begun to discover what they could do. Life was simple, but it was hard to predict, right? Filled with both beauty, but also struggle, and communities were starting to form. But staying alive felt like fighting against nature itself. And again, I'm fascinated by these types of texts, not because I believe them. I don't read the Book of Enoch and think like, oh, this is actual historical literature, but it does give you an insight into some of the ideas and theories about spirituality and divinity that the, Jewish people or some specific sects of Judaism had in this time. So God, Hashem, in his wisdom, decides to give the Watchers, this specific group of angels, a holy task. They weren't supposed to directly interfere with humanity, but to just quietly guide people and make sure that humanity grew according to God's plan. And the Watchers, these were amazing beings. They were angels with wisdom and power, chosen because they were disciplined and devoted to God. They were meant to be guardians, an invisible barrier between the heavenly world and the human world. From their position in the heavens, they watched humanity's happiness and their sadness and, our strengths, our weaknesses. And humanity, again, it's not perfect, right? We already had the fall, according to the book of Genesis, but it has something special, this untapped potential that even fascinated the angels. But what happens when those who are supposed to guide humanity starts to question their own duty? What if their interest turns into something forbidden, something dark, perhaps evil? And this is where the story of the Watchers takes a turn. Everything you need to know about how the Watchers should have acted is in the name. They were supposed to watch, but they didn't just watch, they acted, and their actions would shake the very foundation of creation. It started with curiosity, maybe even like an admiration, and soon this admiration turned into something more dangerous. The beauty of human life, with complicated emotions, and yes, of course, the appeal of human women proved too much for some of them. One angel, Semyaza couldn't resist. He saw something amazing in humanity, something wild, but again, full of potential. And he knew the dangers, right? This kind of contact with humanity was forbidden, but still, he couldn't ignore what he wanted. So he came up with a plan. He was going to fall from grace, and he wasn't going to fall alone. Semyaza gathered others, convincing them to make a promise of rebellion, and 200 of these watchers, 200 angels, agreed to leave their heavenly jobs, coming down to earth to act on their earthly desires, no matter the cost. And this is where everything changes, right? This is the beginning of something much bigger, something that would affect all of the development of humanity. The story of the Watchers is far from over, but what they did wasn't just betrayal. It might have been the start of a new chapter in human history. So the Watchers didn't come to Earth empty-handed also. They brought gifts, powerful, life-changing knowledge that pushed humanity forward in ways that we never could have imagined. But as history has shown, knowledge can be both helpful and hurtful. What the Watchers gave us helped build civilization, but it also brings chaos. So let's start with Azazel. Among the 200 watchers or angels, his name stands out, and for good reason. Azazel taught humanity metallurgy, showing us how to make weapons from iron and bronze. And this was a lesson in control and power. So with weapons, humans no longer needed to depend on just physical strength or large numbers. Power could now be held by those who controlled the tools of war. As a result, the battles become bloodier and fights get worse, and tribes battle for land and resources and revenge. The weapons bring power, but it also creates chaos and violence. But Azazel doesn't stop there. He also reveals the secrets of decoration and beauty. Things like jewelry, makeup, other symbols of beauty became common. And what might seem, harmless in today's time was in ancient times something completely new. And these gifts create vanity and desire, and they cause envy and temptation. And the Watchers had shown humanity a world where appearance could be a weapon just as dangerous as, any cannon or gun. So while Azazel shaped Earth's physical tools, another Watcher, known as Kokabel, turned humanity's eyes to the heavens. He taught us astrology, the study of stars, and the secrets of how these celestial bodies move. And to early humans, this is life-changing, right? The heavens, once an unknowable space, now becomes a cosmic map that can predict seasons and help navigation and find distant lands and even, maybe, predict future events. But with this knowledge comes another temptation, the desire to control the future. So Armaros taught the art of spells and curses, introducing humanity to the world of magic. And these teachings opened doors to control the natural world and other people. And magic, once hidden in the shadows, now becomes a tool for those seeking power. At first, these gifts seem like blessings, right? You can navigate, you can build, weapons, you can protect yourself. And farming improves and societies become more organized. Humanity begins to take control of its environment. The Watchers' knowledge built the foundation for, these early civilizations, but the progress comes at a cost. The weapons lead to war, vanity causes corruption, magic and astrology, once tools of wonder, become sources for fear and manipulation. But it gets even crazier. In the Book of Enoch, it is described how the worst result of the Watchers' rebellion was the creation of the Nephilim. Again, this is something that is in sort of apocryphal gospels or Gnostic gospels, that, books that are around the time of many of the books we know from the Bible, but are not included in the biblical canon. But reference to the Nephilim does exist in the biblical canon. But in this specific instance, this is from the Book of Enoch, which is not included, but it does share the same word, which is very interesting. The Nephilim were mixed beings. In the Book of Enoch, it's described as being born from forbidden relationships between angels and humans, and they were giants in every way. They had huge physical size, and it was matched only by their massive appetites for food and power and destruction. And the Book of Enoch describes how the Nephilim used up Earth's resources, turning this farmland into these empty wastelands. And their presence upset the balance of nature itself, leaving destruction basically everywhere that they went. And it wasn't just the Nephilim's physical strength that scared humanity, it was their moral evil, right? The Nephilim were said to have gotten their worst qualities from both their angel and human parents. So pride, greed, a hunger for control, and they were cruel rulers, and their reign of terror brought humanity to the edge of disaster. And the Book of Enoch, again, goes on to share that as humanity fell into chaos, heaven could no longer stay silent. The Watchers' rebellion had not only corrupted the earth, but it also went against the very order of God's creation in its own right. Their gifts had brought war and greed and destruction, and the children of these watchers, the Nephilim, used up the world's resources and spread violence across the land. And the earth suffered under the weight of their sins, and God's judgment was on its way. So the Book of Enoch tells us that God, seeing the destruction caused by the watchers and their children, he, called upon his most powerful archangels to step in. Yeah, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. And they were given the jobs of restoring balance. And their mission is pretty clear. Punish the watchers, cleanse the earth, and make sure that such a rebellion never happens again. So what do? The boys roll in 4 deep. They got to find Azazel. This is the guy that teaches metallurgy. And as the main cause of humanity's corruption, the secret of weapons and vanity and forbidden knowledge, his punishment is quick but harsh. He's tied up hand and foot, thrown into a dark, rocky pit beneath the earth. The archangels then cover him in sharp stones, and they seal him into an eternal prison. Now, again, this is very, emblematic of like Hercules, where you have these sort of powerful beasts that are, sent under the earth. In Islam, you have the idea of Yajuj and Majuj that are, basically hidden in the earth somewhere, waiting to come out. And once again, in the Book of Enoch, you have similar themes that, like I've said before, sort of transgress time. And as we see with Azazel, he's sent under the earth where he will remain blinded by darkness until the day of judgment when he would face his final fate. Semyaza, the leader of the Watchers, just as guilty. Though he had not shared necessarily as much knowledge as some of the other angels, he planned the rebellion in the first place, and his fellow angels, he basically brought them into sin. So Semyaza was thrown into the abyss alongside the other Watchers. He's tied up in chains and basically banished beneath the mountains of the earth. It's said in the Book of Enoch, their cries of despair echoed through the earth as they waited for divine punishment. But the Watchers' punishment wasn't the end of the cleansing, right? You still have these Nephilim, these monster-like hybrid things born from these forbidden unions with, these evil, rebellious angels and our hot-ass human women. And they posed a greater threat, right? Their existence is an insult to the natural order. They're too powerful and too many to be defeated by human hands. They were swept away in the Great Flood. This catastrophic event, recorded not only in the Book of Enoch, but basically every single culture around the world, as well as the Book of Genesis, was a reset, a divine act to wash away the sins of the Watchers and their creation. And the flood, as it's known in Christianity, marks the end of an era. The earth was cleansed, but the scars of the Watchers' rebellion still remains. Their influence in the knowledge that they had shared and the ruins of civilization that they had corrupted and the myths and the legends that would be passed down through generations still persists. But what happens to the Watchers themselves? The Book of Enoch tells us that they're imprisoned under the earth, trapped in darkness and suffering. These angelic beings, once respected as, God's most formidable guardians, were now sentenced to an eternity of pain, but the story doesn't end there. Some traditions suggest that the Watchers' imprisonment wasn't meant to last forever. Book of Enoch, specifically First Enoch, hints at a final judgment, a time where the Watchers would be brought out of their prisons to face God's final verdict. Their fate, like their story, who knows? Were they truly defeated, or does their influence still affect us through time? This depends on who you ask. The Watchers' fall serves as a kind of a warning story about the dangers of going against divine law and the results of using knowledge without wisdom. But it also raises questions about humanity itself, right? If the Watchers were punished for their rebellion, what does that say about the knowledge that they left behind? Even more frightening is the thought that the Watchers' story might not be over. Now, again, only some people on Earth really look at the Book of Enoch as a true tale of creation. And so some interpretations, their imprisonment beneath the earth is not a final defeat, but a pause, and that perhaps one day they will return. And if they did, what would they find, right? A humanity that potentially reached its potential, or one that repeated the very mistakes that they started. And what's interesting about the Watchers is that, we talked about some of them, right? Semyaza, Azazel, Kokabel, and Oromos, but they were not the only guardians of the heavens who disappeared from history. Hidden within different ancient texts and old stories are stories of other Watchers, though, a little bit less known, or equally as important.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because you own a small business, or maybe you work for a small business, and I am about to make your life so much easier. Let's say, hypothetically, you own a little, furniture business, right? And you're struggling to keep track of the raw materials, the production schedule, invoicing clients, all that stuff. Well, that's why I want to tell you about Odoo, okay? Because with Odoo, it's an all-in-one business platform that streamlines everything. Now you have inventory management, you have manufacturing, you have accounting apps that will make everything so simple. So now if you have a small business, you can monitor the inventory in real time, schedule production calls more effectively, and you can send invoices automatically, all from one platform. Plus, you get a customized CRM to track sales leads and follow up with potential clients, boosting your closing rates. Back in the day, you'd probably have to get, some, Ivy League operator, business person that's, able to make everything happen for you. But now with Odoo, it cuts it all out. And I'm sure you're thinking, okay, if this is going to make my life easier, give me more free time to spend with my friends, family, and playing softball, and make me more money, it must be crazy expensive. This is the good news. Listeners of this program are going to get a 14-day free trial. That's right. You get 2 weeks with Odoo completely for free when you go to odoo.com/camp. That's right. Odoo.com. Use the promo code CAMP and you will get 14 days for free just to try it out. See if you like it. If it's not for you, you don't need it. All right. But Odoo is going to make your life so much easier. Everything you need all in one place. Save time, make more money. Now let's get back to the show.
Penemue was respected as the keeper of secrets and being, a angel with deep intelligence and curiosity. Unlike Azazel, who brought, physical tools of war, Penemue and his gift was subtle but life-changing, the art of writing. Before Penemue came to Earth, humanity depended only on spoken stories and oral tradition passed down through generations, and that's how knowledge was preserved. Stories were temporary, lost as generations passed by, but Penemue introduced the written tool, a tool that could basically preserve ideas forever. With this gift comes the power of memory and culture and history and all sorts of great things, right? Humanity then is able to record its accomplishments and map the lands and write down laws. But as we know, with all gifts of the Watchers, Penemue's knowledge has a darker side. Writing also made deception possible. Lies could be carved into stone, conspiracies could be written in ink, and propaganda could then be spread across the tribes. The truth, once changeable only by memory, became something that could be controlled by those who just held a pen. Some legends suggest that Penemue regretted his gift, watching as humanity twisted the creation for selfish purposes. And in the shadows, he whispered warnings, but they were ignored. And when the archangels came down to deliver this divine judgment, Penemue's punishment was to wander the void, with his voice silenced forever. Kind of a tragic but ironic fate for the scribe of humanity. And then we have Sariel, whose name literally means command of God. And Sariel was a heavenly guide assigned to teach humanity the secrets of the cosmos. In the time before telescopes and compasses, he revealed the movements of the stars, the cycles of the moon, and the rhythm of sort of celestial time. And Sariel's teaching allowed early civilizations to navigate oceans and plant crops and gaze upwards with some type of wonder about the world, right? But again, as we know with many of these gifts, humanity will find a way to selfishly twist things and abuse them. So the stars, once symbols of mystery, became tools for control. Kings would now ask astrologers to predict wars, and priests would use lunar and solar eclipses to strengthen their power. And the cosmic balance that Sariel wanted to share was corrupted by humanity's desire for dominion. Sariel's fate is also a bit of a mystery. Some traditions claim that he was thrown into the abyss alongside Azazel and Semyaza. Others whisper that apparently he still roams the skies, this restless spirit mourning the stars he once hoped to guide humanity to enlightenment. And then we have another angel known as the Perfection of God, or Tamiel. And Tamiel was the guardian of the deep. His domain was the waters, oceans, rivers, all these different sort of aquatic bodies. And Tamiel taught humanity the mystery of water and how to use basically all different types of aquatic sources for survival and prosperity, from irrigation to boats. And, his gifts transformed these growing societies into these massive communities. Yet, his lessons went beyond the practical. He spoke of the sacred nature of water and how it could cleanse the soul and connect humanity to the divine. But in humanity's hands, again, this gift was corrupted. Rituals meant for purification became tools for force. Rivers were poisoned in war, and the seas were not sacred, but as sort of realms to conquer. And Tamiel's betrayal of his heavenly mission was subtle, but again, his fall was not. His fascination with humanity's cleverness blinded him to their greed. So when the Nephilim rose, using up all the earth's resources, Tamiel witnessed the destruction caused by his teaching. His punishment was said to be unique, bound beneath the ocean that he once loved. And Tamiel is condemned to hear the endless cries of the waters that he betrayed. Perhaps the most mysterious of the Forgotten Watchers is Gadriel, and his story is remembered only in pieces and is not fully understood. Unlike his fellow angels, Gadriel's gift to humanity was not one of creation but destruction. He's often blamed for introducing humanity to the concept of war itself, teaching them strategies and battle tactics and crafting fortifications, but the influence went deeper. Gadriel's name is also linked to temptation. Some accounts suggest that perhaps he was the one that whispered to Eve in the Garden of Eden, planting the seed of defiance that would, effectively lead to the fall of humanity. Whether this tale is literal or symbolic, it speaks to his role as a manipulator and a figure who blurred the lines between divine will and human choice. And Gadriel's fall was quick and harsh, unlike Azazel, whose rebellion is sort of direct. Gadriel's influence was sneaky and spread, kind of almost like a disease through the hearts of, the men he was supposed to watch over. And for this, he was cast into darkness, just complete darkness. His name erased from the records of the righteous. Yet, again, some people will say that the echoes of his teaching remain in every conflict. Some suggest that, this idea of the knowledge that the Watchers bring, similar to Prometheus bringing fire to mankind, and that these forbidden teachings are the key to understanding, ancient structures, right? Like the pyramids of Giza or the ruins at Baalbek or, the mysterious Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And, these are massive architectural wonders that kind of change the way human beings understand, civilization and, how advanced human beings were. And we don't really have an answer for how they exist. And oftentimes when people don't know the answer and science can't explain it, they will turn to the mythos, right? So, for example, the Great Pyramids of Giza, each one of these massive blocks is several tons. Each one is estimated to, the heaviest blocks exceed 70 tons, right? These stones were not only transported significant distances, but also positioned with extreme precision. And people will look at this and say, oh, is it possible that, these watchers, these divine beings are the ones that actually, achieve this? Similarly, the ruins of Baalbek in Lebanon, home to the Temple of Jupiter, features these giant stones known as the Stones of Pregnant Women. And these blocks weigh over 1,000 tons each, yet they were somehow quarried and transported and placed with this amazing accuracy. Modern cranes would struggle to lift, weight of that mass, but let alone move them into position that's so perfect. But these ancient builders were able to do it. Same with Göbekli Tepe, which, is considered the world's oldest temple, which adds again to the mystery. Dating back more than 11,000 years, it features these carved stone pillars, some of them weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in this complex circular pattern. And the construction happened before the beginning of agriculture. Like, modern archaeologists suggest that these were non-agrarians, that perhaps these were nomads or pastoralists, which is very puzzling because these historians don't understand how these hunter-gatherer societies could organize and execute such an advanced project. And these accomplishments seem impossible to achieve with the limited knowledge and the technology of the time, which again leads many people to look at the Book of Enoch and suggest maybe it was these watchers, maybe it was these Nephilim that actually were the ones that had the power. I personally don't believe this because this just seems like a crazy theory, but at this show we explore all different types of crazy theories. Astrology, as we mentioned, obviously carries the fingerprints of these watchers, right? Kokabel, and the teaching of the stars and the cosmos, leaves a mark on, human culture. Ancient peoples built these monuments like Stonehenge and the Napta Playa stone circle and, aligning them with the heavens. Basically, every ancient feature seems like it has some alignment with, the stars in some capacity. The Mayans, the Babylonians, they have these detailed calendars and these astrological systems with accuracy that is amazing even to the modern observer. While scientists today credit these achievements to human observations and cleverness, which is likely true, the echoes of these myths of the Watchers leave many people still wondering. And the Watchers' influence doesn't just end in the ancient world, right? They become connected to theories about alien life. Supporters of the ancient astronaut idea argue that the Watchers were not angels from another world, but they were these creatures mistaken for divine messengers by early humans. And what if their divine knowledge was simply misunderstood technology? Take the Nazca Lines in Peru, for instance. Massive pictures carved into the desert floor, spanning hundreds of feet, showing animals, plants, geometric shapes. And the most interesting aspect, these designs are only fully visible from the air, raising the question of how ancient people with no access to flight or aerial perspectives could have created them, or why they would want to show an image to the stars. Some believe that the lines serve as the ceremonial pathways or a celestial calendar, while others speculate that they might have been, like a landing strip or a signal for the gods or anyone above them. Could these formations be evidence of communication or collaboration between humans and, something from beyond Earth, watchers, aliens, whatever you want to call it? Or perhaps it's a leftover remnant of their influence, a proof of, the knowledge that human beings sort of reached or that they have received from, these otherworldly beings. Even the concept of the Watchers connects with modern science in some ways, right? Theories like the simulation hypothesis suggest that our reality might be overseen by, advanced beings, that everything we're doing is some type of simulation, perhaps in a computer by some, even more intelligent being than us. And people would say this aligns with the theory of the Watchers, right? That perhaps we're still being watched, maybe even by these silent observers hiding in the shadows or sort of outside our computing software. And perhaps the Book of Enoch confirms this possibility, or, maybe is just a mythological or religious sort of remnant trying to explain this phenomenon. These beings that are, tied up underneath the earth, right? They're imprisoned beneath the very ground that we walk on. And it matches, some people would say with like these hollow earth theories, which go all the way back to all sorts of different, religions or different philosophies of ancient cultures, like Agartha. It's said to underneath the earth, there are these mysterious beings that have this unknown power. And as we already mentioned, according to some interpretations, the Watchers were imprisoned beneath the earth. And some people say, oh, this is what, these ancient, Eastern philosophies describe as the people underneath earth. Look, it's a crazy theory, but it's worth putting out there. Finally, there's an interesting idea that their teachings were encoded into human DNA, some type of genetic memory waiting to be activated. And this theory suggests that the rapid advancement of the past few centuries, from the Industrial Revolution to space exploration, could be evidence of this programming coming to life. So, what do you think? The story of the Watchers is more than, just some old myth in a book, right? It's pervaded, American culture and exists in media and all sorts of things, but some people truly believe this, right? Some people truly believe that these are angels that came down to earth to, teach humanity something that, went awry. Well, I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I view this just sort of as like, an ancient tale, in an arcane text, some type of mythical explanation. And I find it interesting. I mean, it's one of the more fascinating sort of elements. It's interesting that these, like sort of Jewish nomads, 300 BC, were already talking about like, vanity and war and astrology and, makeup and all sorts of different things that we hear people talking about today, but that they were concerned about it and that then ascribed a lot of these facets of, human nature to, knowledge that is given to us by, these beings, and that it was perverted by humankind, and that there's actually a cosmic reason why these things exist. I think it's a fascinating look into how people of that time thought and what they thought about, the society that they lived in, and how they would sort of mythologize the things that they saw and, give some type of attribution to God. The fact that it was never included into, the biblical canon for many different reasons leads me to believe that, even in that time, this was seen as like a fringe idea, that it wasn't compatible with mainstream Christianity or even mainstream Judaism, that this existed just as a little time capsule to give people an idea of, an explanation for the world that they lived in. But I'm curious what you guys think. Do you believe that, the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, these types of beings, do they actually exist? Is this, a legitimate tale? The fact that they exist in so many different cultures from around the world, does that prove some legitimacy? I think that there's a bunch of different things that are happening here, right? Like the pyramids of Giza are fascinating and massive and difficult to comprehend that, the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom actually created them. So is it possible that they, people that existed in the region before them had more technology that was lost? It makes sense to me. You know what I mean? That's not crazy. Were they, Watchers? Were they Nephilim that were imbued with divine angelic DNA? Probably not. But it is interesting the way that human beings will mythologize the technology that we have and try to moralize it as a way to understand the world that we're living in. But I'm curious what you guys think. I mean, please drop a comment, YouTube, Spotify. I read all of them, and I would love to know what you think. So please be nice also, you know? But again, this has been another episode of Religion Camp. We get to cover my favorite, most interesting topics from every religion from around the world every single Sunday, so I cannot wait to see you at the next one. You are always welcome in my tent. And as always, peace be with you.
What's up, people? Quick announcement. If you are a fan of Camp Gagnon or Religion Camp, I have great news because we are dropping History Camp. That's right. This is the channel where we're going to be exploring the most interesting, fascinating, controversial topics from all time throughout all history. Right? You probably know about Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Nikola Tesla, interesting figures from history, and you probably learned about them in school and they were pretty boring, but not here. No. As you know, I was raised by a conspiracy theorist, so I'm going to be diving deep into all of the interesting, strange, occult, and secretive societal relationships that all of these famous, influential men from our shared past have. So if you're interested, please go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It will be pinned in the description as well as the comments. And if you're on Spotify, this doesn't really apply to you, but these episodes will be dropping as well. Just go ahead and give us a high rating because it really helps the show.